All right. Well, gentlemen, we are live here on Art of Homeownership's Facebook page. First and foremost, I just wanted to say thank you both so much for agreeing to be a part of this. Every Wednesday, we do a training for Art of Homeownership partners. We wanted to open it up to the entire community. To my knowledge, this is the first time we've had both kind of oracles of the mortgage industry on the same platform at the same time. And so to say that I'm extremely excited is understatement. I was both excited and nervous last night to be moderating this. I've learned an incredible amount from both of you, not only over the 15 years that I've been in this business, but more recently, just in the last year and a half, as you both have your platforms to where you talk about market conditions and kind of what to expect. And I think every mortgage professional in the country, they really value themselves as a mortgage professional, not a rate quoter and a loan closer. They need to understand that up-leveling their level of knowledge about the mortgage markets, about the housing market, is incredibly important. I think that it's very clear that a lot of loan officers, one of my good friends played a message for me the other day where the loan officer called, left a message and said, rates are going up. We have to lock in your loan quickly. Just one of those kind of normal call center calls. And it made me think that there's a lot of loan officers out there that are using rates are going up as a way to close loans, as opposed to a way to give good advice and guidance and real strategy. And so without any real context as to why that may be happening. So first, I just wanted to kind of start off the call by having each one of you talk about where you think kind of what's happening with interest rates at the moment, maybe short term, what to expect, long term, what to expect. So let's just start there. Let's talk through the mortgage market and what we can expect with interest rates. Barry, if you want to lead us off, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, sure, man. It's great to be with you, Dan and Ryan. It's wonderful to be with both of you here, and all of you that are watching this. Hope you're all doing great. I think the rates are going to go up short term, and the reason is because we will start to see some inflation reports come out that are going to raise some eyebrows. When you take a look at the comparisons from last year, the second week of May, which I can't believe we're talking about the second week of May, just like right around the corner right now. So after Mother's Day, we're going to get a CPI report. On Friday, we're going to be getting the PCE report. That's the personal consumption expenditure. That's the Fed's favorite measure of inflation. But what's interesting about the CPI report that we're going to be getting in the second week of May, that will be for April. So when we look at the CPI report, essentially what it's doing is it's taking a year-over-year rate of inflation, which is going to take the last 12 months of inflation, add them up pretty much, and that's your year-over-year rate. Right now, if we looked at April of 2020, and you take the 12 months forward to March of 2021, that's the most recent report we got, the core rate of CPI is 1.6%. Now, the core rate means that it strips out food and energy prices, which are more volatile, but there's a real big reason why we strip those out. And some people say, well, wait a minute, Barry, I need food and energy, don't I? Why would the world we strip that out? It's because when we try to understand what the Fed's looking to do, and we have a Fed meeting today, this afternoon, so it'll be interesting to hear the press conference there. What we're looking at is what can the Fed influence with monetary policy? So if you have the ever-given tanker stuck in the Suez Canal and it causes oil prices to rise, the Fed can do whatever they want to do. It's not going to change that. Or weather conditions causing prices to become more affordable in crops or more expensive in crops, depending on the weather. The Fed, as powerful as they might feel that they are, they can't influence that. So they know that, so they go with a core rate of inflation, which more appropriately illustrates the level of inflation that the Fed may have an influence over. So right now it's pretty low, 1.6. But as we get this report for May, we're going to replace April of 2020 with April of 2021. April of 2020, the reading was -0.4%. We don't know what April of 2021 will be, but it's safe to figure it's going to be in the range of 0.2 or 0.3%. That will change. You're going to replace -0.4 with, even if it's just positive 0.2, that's a 0.6% difference. So that means the inflation rate would go from its current level of 1.6%, add 0.6 to that, that's 2.2%. First time we've been over 2% in a long time. And what that's going to do is that's going to put us in a position to raise some eyebrows. But it gets worse than that. Over the summer months, I see it going over 2.5. If you were to take a look at interest rates today and you were to say, now I don't know what people are quoting exactly, but it's in the low threes. And if we just were to pick a number for today and say, I mean, Ryan, you can answer this question better, but would it be safe to assume you're around 3 1/8 with a 0-point quote on a 30-year fix? Is that a ballpark? Okay.
Pretty close. Yep.
So if you're at 1.6% rate of inflation and you're quoting 3 1/8, it kind of makes sense. I don't think you're going to be quoting 3 1/8 with 2.5 or 2.6% rate of inflation. Now, the good news is I do see that being what the Fed's famous word for this is transitory. Our estimates show that in the fall, those numbers will probably wind up being below 2% again. So we see short-term rates going up, but then we see them cycling back down. And then I see a recession coming in 2022, 2023, which would really give us an opportunity to see much lower rates. So I think today's 3% plus rates that you're doing will probably be seeds that you're planting in the future. And much like when I called the recession back in 2018, 2019 for early 2020, which we did get correctly, the call was for people not to pay upfront MI. The call was for people not to pay points, was also not to be in a position where you're really looking for the lowest rate. What you should really be looking for is a rate that you can actually take a higher rate in exchange for lower fees, because we thought that you'd be refinancing these transactions to a much lower rate. Now, certainly COVID, which happened, the lockdowns became more apparent in March, April, May. After we hit recession, which was January 2020, rates went even further to the downside. That exacerbated it, of course, but it was a really good call to do that. And I see a similar setup for 2022, 2023, because when the stimulus wears off, and we'll talk more about this, I want to hear from Dan too, but we think that you're going to see a void in the economy, and there'll be a pretty big slowdown with a lot of debt overhang.
So some of the, and that is amazing. Thank you for that information. Now, would you give the same advice in today's environment?
Yeah.
Home buyers should be opting for a slightly higher rate, not paying the cost, because we believe within 2022, 2023 they'll have the ability to come back down.
I do. I see that. I mean, here and I apologize. I don't mean to kind of just continue to speak here, Dan. So forgive me, but
take your time, Barry.
So here's what we see. When you look, just look at it this way. In 2020, CARES Act 1 and 2 totaled $2.8 trillion of debt. $2.3 trillion in March, $500 billion. That means are huge numbers. In April, $2.8 trillion. By October, it already was kind of ephemeral, wore off. The GDP for 2020 was 4.3%, but in the fourth quarter, it was 0.4%. It was 3.9 in the first 3 months. So it wore off. Now, the same numbers happened between December, 900 billion, December of 2020, and March of 2021, 1.9 trillion. It's the same number. It's 2.8 trillion. If the playbook's the same towards the end of this year, chances are you will see this wear off and begin to slow down into 2022, 2023. And without the steroid, without this juice, I don't think the economy will be as vibrant. In fact, I see it slowing down. And in addition to that, I think that the debt overhang that we have now will begin to rear its head. And we know this everywhere in the world, everywhere in history. As debt goes up, it causes economies to slow, inflation to slow, and as a result, interest rates to decline. The experts always get it wrong. They think more debt, higher rates because of inflation. It's the exact opposite. The more debt over a little bit of time causes rates to go down.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Dan.
Yeah, so it would make for good television to disagree with a lot of what Barry said, but I can't. I have a slightly different twist. I don't even know twist, just maybe timing. But I have to say, Barry, I completely agree with you. And it is amazing to me how popular this belief is that all this stimulus and debt is going to cause inflation. It just doesn't do it. It never has. And where the Fed used to spend $1 of stimulus, they would get $1 of growth in the GDP. Now it's taking $6 of stimulus to get the same dollar of growth. That's not sustainable. And yet I don't see how the Fed stops this right now. They're on this sort of crazy treadmill that if they stop running, it's going to throw them, through the window. So I don't think it ends well. I'm not here to predict doomsday or anything like this, but I see exactly what Barry sees. I definitely see a recession coming, probably when people least expect it. Same with the stock market selling off. It'll be when people least expect it. And we might even agree more than I think we do. So when you said, what do I think? What do we think with rates short term? And Barry follows technicals as closely, if not closer than I do. So gave you more of a fundamental answer, which I agree with. Technically, I think we're sideways, and I would say that we're probably going to test the bottom of that range, which on the MBS is probably about par 50-ish. But so last week I could have been completely confident and told you where I think the range is going to go, where the breakouts are. But this is a week where gosh knows, I got to keep it clean, what Powell is going to say. And there's been a pretty good track record of him saying something that just pisses off the market, and we see this big sell-off. And then days or weeks later, we get it back. And then on top of that, once we got to digest all that, we have two of the biggest news releases coming of the quarter. As Barry said, the PCE numbers are everything. And the average loan officer or the average consumer thinks that CPI matters. It does, but nothing like personal consumption. Personal consumption is 70% of GDP. So if those prices start skyrocketing, that could spell trouble. The only thing that I'm not sure I agree with on, and that is how much of this inflation is priced in. Because to me, maybe sometimes things aren't as obvious to the world as they are to guys like Barry and I. But to me, like anybody that's in the markets would see this coming. This number in month inflation is going to be considerably higher than last month's inflation. But I think at least the stock markets tended to look through that. The bond market historically has. I don't know if they are right now. But the point being, the analogy I've given is I got really hungry in 2020, right? I couldn't eat. There wasn't enough food. And then all of a sudden, I got these stimmies in my pocket, and I'm just going to go to McDonald's and eat as many jumbo meals as I can. And I'm going to keep eating. And that's what the consumer's doing. And then I'm going to get stuffed. By the way, meanwhile, the burger companies, the bun companies, they're gearing up production like crazy. They're trying to ship this stuff overseas. The freighters are backed up in Long Beach. One of my members sent me a picture yesterday. It was unbelievable what that looks like. And I'm sure harbors across the country look that way. So I look at all this as catch-up burger making, not ketchup like you put on the burger, but catching up. We got to catch up on making all this food because the consumer's gobbling it down. And all of a sudden, the consumer's going to say, I'm full. And that's about the time when the stimulus wears off. And I think that's when the manufacturers end up having to pull way back. You see the ISM, which is the manufacturing numbers. You'll see the service numbers pull back, and you'll start moving into that recession that Barry and I both see. So we're really aligned. The only thing I don't know, he might be right, is how much is priced in? How much does the market see that these inflation numbers are going to be really high? Because if they are priced in, we might not see the jump in rates that we expect.
Yeah, and I should have. You're right. I should have gone a little bit deeper and further. I was trying to be concise, but we've seen mortgage rates move up a little bit, right? So let's call it mortgage rates are up. I don't know, 0.5%. Ryan, right. You're better to correct me. So yeah, we've seen less than that move up in the inflation numbers, right? So we've seen a smaller increase. So it's anticipated some, but not all. What I see that come the summer months, we'd probably be about 0.3% higher in mortgage rate. That's what I'm seeing. Maybe it's 0.5%. It's difficult to get an exact number there, but I think that's a fair range to assume over the summer that we'd see higher mortgage rates due to just some of the shock value that we're going to see in some of these inflation numbers.
Yeah,
so 3.5 over summer is kind of the estimation roughly.
Could we get upwards of that? Maybe, maybe sure. 3 3/4, maybe a little bit. It depends on the thing that we don't know is what other news is coming out. We don't know what else will be out there that could guide us in either direction. But in the absence of news that would be a surprise, if things kind of stayed relatively as expected, I think that you can anticipate mortgage rates to be 3.5, 3 5/8, maybe 3 3/4, in my humble opinion, over the summer.
Got it. And Dan, were you going to say something?
So I see two sides of that, and I hate to be wishy-washy here, but I still think that more of this inflation and shock value is priced in. So I don't see we're going to get that much of a jump in interest rates. But on the flip side of that is if you look at things like copper, copper's been a real strong leading indicator of interest rates, as has oil. And I think oil is about to make a huge move. We're long oil right now. And copper's already, just had this huge run. If you look at charts, copper and treasuries run very closely. And right now, treasuries have not caught up with copper. So that would put it more in Barry's camp. So, it's going to be real interesting. The one thing, and this is purely guessing, so put as much value in it as a guess is worth. I think there's a black swan event coming for the stock market. I don't know what it is yet, but I think it's going to be severe, and I think it could be soon. And I'd love to hear Barry's thoughts on this. This thing's about as overbought as it can get. We're seeing valuations exceeding the dot-com era. Now, true, corporate earnings have been surprising to the good, but all of a sudden, when corporations report their earnings, the stock market's punishing them anyway, even if they're beating their earnings. If you guys know what SPACs are, these are the new fancy way to go public, and those SPACs went absolutely insane. Every time a company rolled out a new SPAC, the stock was going up, huge each day. Those are all falling now. Same day IPOs are falling. So we're seeing a lot of similarities as we did during the dot-com era. And so I think if there is a black swan event between now and summer, well, summer's coming, but that could also really soften interest rates.
Yes, and as well as the non-fungible tokens, the NFTs, which are all the rage, but really have come back crashing back down to earth. I mean, I try not to invest in things I don't understand. I understand what it is. I don't understand why it's valuable. So, people tell me you got to get involved. I says, I'm sorry, I'll probably miss the boat on it, but it just to me, I can't. If I can't comprehend why it's of value, I tend to stay away from it.
Me too.
So what you said was interesting. One of the greatest investors of all time, one of the people that I have so much respect for, Sir John Templeton, would say that bull markets are born on pessimism, they grow on skepticism, they mature on optimism, and die on euphoria. And if you look at all of the readings in the Citigroup Panic Euphoria Index, we're at enormous levels, much higher than where normal euphoria is, and much higher than where the dot-com bubble broke. And this is, by every measure possible, the most expensive stock market ever. But as John Maynard Keynes said, the markets can remain irrational longer than we can remain solvent. And there is a lot that's pushing this. And one of them is, as you know, TINA. There is no alternative, TINA. It's very, very difficult when you're not offered a lot of other opportunities. This is the baby of Janet Yellen and Ben Bernanke when they said we want to have the wealth effect, and now they're wondering why there's a wealth gap. Well, you created it, so you got exactly what you said you wanted to do. You don't give people an alternative. You punish people for savings, and you force grandma and everybody else to go into the stock market. Well, guess what? Only 50% of people can afford to go into the stock market, so you're going to leave 50% of the people behind. But when this thing does turn down, as you said, I am in total alignment with you that what's the old saying? The stock market tends to do the most damage to the most people at the worst time. Mm-hmm. And that scenario definitely seems to be unfolding.
Yeah. And also, though, we can't, I've been off on my, it's topping, it's going to crash, for a bit now because of the Fed. As long as the Fed keeps injecting crack, the patient's going to stay high. And I don't know when he pulls the needle out. And like I said before, if he pulls that needle out, that's running on the treadmill. It's going to throw people back. But
the other black swan event, and maybe it's not such a black swan because, by definition, a black swan is you don't see it coming, right?
Right.
There is telegraphed that there's going to be some sort of a tax package that will increase taxes. And in a nascent recovery, I would question, is that a smart thing to do in a nascent recovery? Because that could be just the event that creates the excuse, especially if it's capital gains related, to say, oh, I want to take my ball and go home at these high levels and save 20% in tax. So that's definitely a possibility, right?
Yep.
So guys, a lot of our
market's like a bug looking for a windshield, and anything like that, the tax issue, it could just be that windshield down the freeway. But I think other than that, Barry and I are pretty much aligned. It's just a question of how much is priced in. I think probably more is priced in than he does. Maybe have us back in 45 days and we'll recheck our thoughts.
Deal. Don't have to ask me twice. So a lot of our art of homeownership partners right now are asking a couple things. One, they want to know housing market related stuff, and then they want to know kind of the depth of the recession. In that recession, how low do we think we're going in the Dow? How low do we think we're going in interest rates? And is housing going to be a part of that recession? Will it hold? Will it be pulled down? What's everyone's thoughts on those three topics?
Well, who would you like to go first?
Well, let's have Dan go this time.
So the housing market's an interesting discussion, and there is more and more talk of a bubble. And normally I would agree with a bubble. All the components are there. But I want to go back and address that for a second. But the pent-up demand and the millennials are so overwhelming. I forgot the stat. Barry probably knows it, but every month X amount of millennials are buying at a faster pace than the baby boomers ever did. And if you look what the baby boomers did to the housing market as we came into our spending years, you're going to see that effect on the millennials. And by the way, that's why on the recession question, I don't think it's super deep and I don't think it's super long because of the millennials. Using the baby boomers as a recipe, it's been proven that when we get Americans hit age 47, those are our peak spending years. After that, we don't care as much about fancy stuff. Now, upper end, high net worth people like Barry, their peak spending years are actually older. So you take your upper middle class, upper class, they're going to keep spending until they're in their mid 50s. But average consumer at about 47. But up until that point, from 35 to 47, these millennials are going to be spending like crazy. Now, granted, I'm an old guy. I'm going to be going the other way. I already am going the other way. So, but I still think the millennial spending will outstrip the baby boomers pulling back. So that's why I think it's not going to be severe. However, going back to what Barry said, this debt thing, you can't ignore it. And it's a governor on whatever happens. No matter how much the millennials want to spend, you have this huge debt problem. So I don't see GDP ever, I hate to use the word ever, but it's going to be a really long time before we see GDP, get over 3% and stay there, other than the next 2 quarters. So back to housing. The only thing that makes me nervous right now is it's obvious supply and demand affect prices, right? Anyone that took economics 101 knows that. What I don't like is when you have lack of supply and increased demand together in the same sentence. To me, that's bubble-ish. I'd like to see too much demand with average supply, or not enough supply with too much demand. But when you put the two together, I think you do get some artificial increases, and I think you could see a pullback. And housing affordability, if you ever want to know when to get out, just watch the housing affordability index. I honestly sold my house in 2007 because I looked at the affordability index and I hit 47 at that point. So I was like, okay, it's time to start thinking about being more conservative. Do we need this big house, et cetera? And the affordability numbers were ridiculous. I didn't know at that point the subprime market was going to crash. I should have, but so affordability is starting to inch up as prices go up. And if Barry's right, and if rates go up in the summer and prices go up, you have the recipe for a pullback.
Where do you see the affordability index now, and where is it at a point where you pull the ripcord?
I can't spew a number offhand. I'd have to look at the chart, but to me, I'm a chart guy, so I just look at it and tell you. Barry might know that one offhand, but it's not nearly as high as it was. But it's
the 7th most affordable market in history right now.
It's the
7th most affordable market.
Got it.
The affordability is really strong right now. Media doesn't understand affordability. So you asked some really good questions there. And Dan, I don't know if you had any other thoughts before I was going to.
No, jump in. Yeah.
All right. So recessions tend to mirror expansions, at least economically. So I think that if we have a recession, it'll mirror the relatively shallow expansion that we've had, right? That's the last recession mirrored a very shallow expansion. So it's going to be a shallow recession. A time is compressed, and you have the Fed will come in, and the Fed will do QE infinity or whatever it takes to cushion it. So You can look at the same things that have happened over and over again. People look at housing, they say, okay, well, what if there's a recession? We'll look at every single recession, housing does well. Why? Because interest rates drop, makes homes, as Dan said, more affordable. And so housing does well. Stock market, after the initial hit, recovers and does well during recessions because the Fed's going to pump in liquidity. So this is a similar recipe that I see if we do get, I don't know if we get the textbook definition of recession, but we should see somewhat recession-like conditions and slowdown conditions, enough to, from an interest rate standpoint, bring us to lower interest rates than where we are currently, or where we'll be over the summer, certainly, in my opinion. Housing, I've got a lot of ideas on housing, and fortunately, we've been able to get housing pretty darn good. We definitely think that the housing market is super hot, as everybody does, but I don't see a crash in housing at all. And I think that the comparisons, whenever you pull them up to 2007, 8, or 9, you really have to look at it, not just viewing it as, okay, prices went up, so therefore it's a bubble. That's not the case. In 2007, there were 116 million households in the United States. Today, there's 128 million households. So there's 12 million more households. However, homes for sale went from 3.7 million to 1 million, or 1.02 million at the most. So call it a million. So now you're looking at 2.7 million less households for sale for 12 million more households. Last year, builders went out of business for 5 months. So that supply that we would normally see isn't there. Lumber prices have tripled in the past 2 years. They're up 36% last month. And it is very, very difficult with all the regulation to bring that supply to market. Vacancies are at an all-time low. All of these things do not suggest a pullback in housing that's going to be of a significant level. That said, I'm uncomfortable with seeing people bid all this money over asking price. You really need to evaluate that, because you shouldn't just like willy-nilly it. I mean, you have to understand, how long will it take for the housing market to come back? Because those people put themselves in an individual bubble. Now, for that person, they might say it's a housing bubble. If you bid $100,000 over asking price, and asking price is $20,000 over what the real value should be, yeah, you bought a house that created a housing bubble for your purpose, for your purchase. But the overall housing market does not have to be. That person will complain a year from now and say, oh, housing bubble. No, you just made a bad decision. Okay. Maybe it was a bad financial decision. It might have been a good decision for you and your family to enjoy, but understand the ramifications of it. If you want to go buy an exotic sports car and it depreciates by 50% in the next 2 years, you knew going in that that was the game, right? So think about it in those terms. What we want to understand for our customers is that the setup suggests that home prices will continue to appreciate at a reasonably good level by and large, but real estate is going to vary by zip code too. And it's going to vary by the individual decision on purchasing a home, whether they get a good deal on it or not, or whether they pay exorbitant amount over asking price. So these are the things that have to be contemplated when we talk about bubble. Now, let's look at California for a minute. California has seen home prices continuously go up for most of the time, and certainly on average at a very high clip. And yet we all know that California is quite expensive. And people would say, well, California is not really affordable, right? Just think about that. So why do real estate values keep going up? Because when you look at the United States homeownership rate of somewhere in the neighborhood of 67 to 68%, California's homeownership rate is closer to 55%. So the point is this: if you take 100 people and say that's how many people there are, and if the homeownership rate is 55%, but there's only 45 homes for sale, guess what? Values will go up. So the way that values keep going up and the way that affordability is compensated for is population. And when you have simply too many people that will buy, you don't need 67% home ownership. If 55% home ownership, which you shave off the people that won't qualify or won't afford, even at that smaller amount, if that overwhelms the supply, well, then the law of supply comes to be. It's a law. Prices will go up. If you have 65 homes for sale and 55% homeownership rate, prices will go down. So this is what you have to think about: is where is the new supply going to come from? And people look at 2006. Well, we were building 2 million homes a year. We just broke 1 million homes. We're nowhere near that, and our population's gone. So Could we see a pullback? Could we see it locally? Could we see it individually? Yes. But I don't think we see it, at least in the short term, right? The next year or two, broad-based.
So one of the things you said, and that was incredible, thank you for that insight, both of you. One of the things you touched on, Barry, was the cost of lumber. Is the expectation that that's going to come back down when COVID restrictions ease and it becomes a little bit easier, or are we just in a position where that's just what lumber costs now?
There's insects that are harming lumber. The beetles are killing lumber. Regulation is also. Listen, I'm not going to debate whether it's a good thing or bad thing with regulation. Okay,
Sure.
I want to be a good humanitarian, of course, and I'm just trying to report it from a business angle. So there are obstacles in bringing this to make housing supply, and land is not easily accessible. So
right.
This is all, and then resources. Okay, it's easy to say build 100 homes here, but where are you going to come up with the electric, the sewer, areas have brownouts already, right? So it sounds easy until you try to do it, and that's where things can become difficult, and the population is increasing. And look, one of the things that we're known for is looking at demographics. We did this before anybody else did, and it's so nice to see now. I see some people like using it and discovering demographics finally, 20 years after we've been talking about it. But when we look at this and we say, look at the birth rates from 33 years ago, and you see this enormous escalation at what happened 30, 31, 32 years ago, you ain't seen nothing yet. There's about to be a wave of first-time home buyers that are going to be even bigger in number and stronger in number. And that's why this is so mind-boggling to me, why you would want to incent more first-time home buyers with a bill that would give you free money to be a first-time home buyer, when that's not the problem. The problem is help the first-time home buyer by allowing for more supply somehow and alleviating the costs that the builders are facing. So I'll get off the soapbox.
No, love that.
That was a great statement, actually. I agree. This tax credit is hilarious because they can't buy homes even if they want to right now, and it's going to get worse. I don't even know how that ends. But what if you take that incentive and give it to the builders? Give them 15 grand a house. I hadn't thought about that.
Well, what
they should be thinking.
What we've been saying, Dan, is we've been saying that if you have a builder that in an MSA or a zip code is willing to build 75 to 80% or less below the median home price,
right,
that is something that you should incent. And that's where the money would go. And ultimately that would help because, Dan, as you know, what happened in 2009 and 2010 with that $8,000 first-time homebuyer tax credit? People just crammed in. And by the way, we were looking for buyers then. And then in April of 2010, what happened to the housing market? You heard crickets. So people pushed prices higher than the $8,000 that they got. So they paid $15,000 more. And then the home was worth $25,000 less. All for an $8,000 tax credit, they wound up losing $40,000. It was not a smart thing to do, and this will make it even worse. But I don't know why people just don't look at a history book, or they just it boggles. It makes me crazy.
Yes, yeah. There's a couple questions about the tax credit here. So for those of you who don't know, there's a proposal or a bill in Congress where home buyers would get up to $15,000 for a tax credit as a first-time home buyer, or up to 10% of the price of the home.
And there's two of them, Ryan. There's another one for 20 to 25.
25,000.
Yeah, it's a grant, isn't it?
20 to 25.
Waters.
Yeah. And so I'm listening to this thinking, oh, that's great, but the last thing we need is more demand, right? Like what we need is more inventory. And so I think the idea of incentivizing builders and helping subsidize their cost if they can build affordable homes is a phenomenal idea. Hopefully you guys are all ready to write your congressman.
Yeah. Ryan, it's something that you always hear about, right? Right, Dan? We always hear about unintended consequences, right? Well, unintended consequences because they don't think this thing through. So if they would think it through, they wouldn't have it. But this would be another unintended consequence. You know what I believe that everybody should do is send your member of Congress a Rubik's Cube, because they don't understand the concept. The concept of if you change this, everything else stays the same is the way they all think. But they should understand there's a concept. If you change something, it affects other things and other things change. But people in Congress, for whatever reason, cannot understand that concept. So let's all buy them a Rubik's Cube each, and let's get them started with that. That will really help things.
It's a good idea.
Love that. Well, guys, one of the things we teach Art of Homeownership is being the most well-educated, value-based mortgage professional we can be to our clients. Obviously, you guys both impart that hugely in your businesses and how you help the people that follow you. What are some of the resources that mortgage professionals should look to in order to add more value to their clients now and well into the future?
Well, Dan does some great stuff where he teaches people really how to become good traders in the marketplace and how to use some different tools that, that I think Dan does a great job with. And I think everybody should be in touch with that. We do a couple of things, of course, MBS Highway, Ryan, which you're well aware of. And then the Certified Mortgage Advisor designation, which I think it's really important to, we don't want to be salespeople. We want to be advisors. I know the people we're preaching to the choir with the people watching this, but listen, you have to separate yourself right now, right? I mean, if you think about it, what is your advantage? It's not rate, okay? And it's not, if you think doing a loan faster than somebody else is a competitive advantage, please rethink that, because everything is going to an automated form, okay? Everything, okay? We don't use, we don't use carbon copies anymore, okay? We don't use faxes rarely. Fax is kind of antiquated, okay? So everything is going to be automated, everything. And what we really need to be thinking about is, what is the one competitive advantage we have? It's right here. It's right here. People say to me all the time, say, Barry, you're in touch with the markets. They ask you too, Dan, right? They say, Barry, what do you think about Bitcoin? What do you think about this? And where should I put my money? I said, here's where you should put your money. The best investment in the world, make it in your brain. That's the best investment in the world. So that's what we'll do. That's why, Ryan, with Art of Home Ownership, the tools that you give, the education that you give is just, it's so important, because the competitive forces that are out there, everybody's reaching into the pie. When the pie was huge in 2020, you didn't feel it. Okay, we're all so busy writing loans, right? But once things slow down a little bit, you start to feel the footprints of these other large beasts that are in there in this marketplace that are eating some of the available pie. And what we have to do is increase our batting average, be smarter. And if you think about really, what are your tools? Your tools are your words. How do you articulate the opportunity for people? Are you sharp in that? Are you rehearsed in that? Do you talk to, do you practice in your office? Are you sharpening your words? Have you recorded your phone conversations and listened to them? Do you sound like a salesperson, or do you sound like an advisor? And would you listen to you? And are you humble enough to understand that there are things you don't know? And are you willing to learn the things you don't know and to reach out, find those resources, and make yourself better every day? These are the questions that you have to ask in this changing market.
Yeah. I would add, just talking about what you're doing, Ryan, and Ryan is incredibly humble. I love that about him. And he said something to me that really, really blew my mind. It was beautiful. And to Barry's point, he talked about having some of his best years ever, and that he was disappointed. He was upset with himself. And I've never heard an originator. I'm not saying there are not some. I mean, I know some amazing, the Jeremy Forciers of the world, Josh Mills. They're focused as Ryan is, but your average high producer, not at a Ryan or a Josh or a Jeremy level, they're just thinking about, the next number, the next goal. And Ryan is not that way at all. He's thinking about, how do I make the experience better for a homeowner? How do I make homeowners smarter? What did I do when I grew my business to add value to the homeowner, other than deliver a good rate with good service? Because to Barry's point, every single field gets leveled over time. So whatever advantage you have, it's not sustainable, except, as Barry said, right here. And that's exactly what you're doing, Ryan, and I love it. So we do teach people how to trade options and kind of protect their 401k and all that stuff. And we also have I'll call it a mini Barry product. And I want to be clear here. I had a lot of conversations with people I respect about, is this competing with Barry? Because there's no reason to compete with Barry. He's got it. MBS Highway is an amazing product. But I felt like maybe people would like, just like you're doing here, Ryan. I mean, the feedback we got is, man, I love what Barry's thinking. I'd love to know what does Dan think? Because sometimes in just these slight differences of opinions we have, this sort of professional tension, that's when the originator has to apply his own logic. Okay, well, Barry said about this makes sense, but Dan said about that makes sense, and therefore And now they're making a big boy, big girl decision instead of just blindly following Barry or blindly following myself. So we have a product called Market Mentor. It's marketmentorship.com. And we supply content. It's extremely low priced. It does not have the charting. It does not have the stuff that MBS Highway. I want to be clear. I don't want to compete with Barry. But what I do want to do is offer sort of some second opinion or confirmation to what you're thinking about doing. And we do a lot of hand holding. We do live updates twice a day as the market opens, as the market closes, talking about the very technical aspects of the markets. And then as Barry is, I've always been a very much a macro economist. And so we talk about how these macro issues are going to affect interest rates. And the whole idea is to try and make our members smarter and so that they can be a market mentor. I want to be their mentor so they can become their referral source mentor. So that's my suggestion.
Yeah, and with MBS Highway, I mean, of course, we talk about the markets, of course, and we issue alerts and all of that, but that's a small part of what we do. I mean, it's really, the platform is geared for, assisting you in marketing, assisting you with enormous database and rich real estate data and content and forecasts for every zip code and tools that you could use and social media tools and video recording tools and how to evaluate whether you should bid over ask on a property specifically based upon when will that value based on what you're bidding eclipse how much you're going over. There's just so much in there. It's too much to go over here, but it's a really vast product that helps you just as an overall originator. So yeah, I think it's a very good idea to have as much resources as you can. I mean, I read several different economists. I subscribe to a lot of different services. I get value from all of them. And I know that you get value from what Dan is providing because Dan's an incredibly bright guy and very well respected. So you should certainly subscribe to Dan's tool because I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think that you would find enormous value in what Dan does. And I hope that you find a lot of value in what we do at MBS Highway.
Yeah, guys, to summarize this, Barry said earlier, the best investment, and my financial planner told me this one time because I was, I think Barry said, what is it, Tina?
There is no alternative.
Yeah, there's no alternative, right? And so I'm thinking, where do we invest? And that's a big topic amongst a lot of originators because we've all been fortunate to earn good income over the last few years. Where do we invest? What do we do? Invest back in yourself, invest back in your business, but more importantly, invest back in your clients. Right? For the next 10 years, if the one thing that you follow in your business or the one motto of your business is that your success is not determined by the number of loans you sell, but your success as an originator, as a team, as a company is determined on how successful your clients ultimately become, you're going to win. But you have to invest in that. That doesn't come by just, selling rates or giving terms or even structuring a loan correctly, right? Giving good advice or structuring a loan correctly is one part of that Rubik's Cube. But then the next 30 years comes into play and we have to be proactive with our clients. And great ways to do that is having MBS Highway fed into you, having market mentorship fed into you on a daily basis, having the tools to utilize, definitely get certified through CMA, right? Having that badge and that distinguishment that you've gone through, because look, we're all very clear that it's not hard to become a mortgage professional, right? Or a loan officer. You take that test, it teaches you nothing about actually doing mortgages. Going through a certified mortgage advisor will teach you how to be a better originator and your clients will feel it. The questions you ask, the answers you give, they will absolutely feel that you are a higher caliber, which in turn will mean more value for them during the transaction. And then Art of Homeownership takes over for the next 30 years. And so think through your business and ask yourself, how much value am I providing that nobody else can say they're providing, or that very few people can say they're providing? And by getting the information, go back and listen to this recording 3 or 4 times. I can tell you I'm going to go listen to, what they're saying about interest rates, what they're saying about the recession, what they're saying about the housing market. And that will be a big part of my discussions with my clients moving forward. It will be a big part of the discussions with my realtor partners, with my CPAs, with my financial planners. And having that insight is invaluable. So before we go here, we have a million questions, and we're not going to have time to get through all of them. But we'll make sure you guys get these. Some of these are for Dan, some of these are for Barry. If you were to kind of summarize, like let's say I'm talking to a client, and that client's trying to figure out, should I buy a home? right? Is now a good time to buy a house? What's going to happen with interest rates? What's going to happen with the housing market? Everybody asks us to put our crystal ball on the table and show them what we know. What would be a good, concise, let's call it 60-second response to that answer that you guys would feel would help us stand apart just from, you know, the average person who's going to say, yes, you should definitely buy a home. Rates are going up. Housing is going to keep going up without any sort of fundamental knowledge behind it.
Well, if you'd like me to take that one,
yeah, please.
First thing I would do is, you know, buying a home is very individual, and right now it's not easy to do. But if you're willing to make the effort, the rewards are enormous. So the first thing I would do is I'd walk them through a real estate report card. That's right, an MBS Highway, so they could see what the outlook is, what the current conditions are, whatever. I'd show them a community report in MBS Highway so they could see what they're buying, where they're going. Then I would give them the buy versus rent if they're first-time home buyers, so they can see a dollar-for-dollar comparison and keep them engaged. I'd also show them a cost of waiting report, which really shows it for their zip code, why they shouldn't give up, because they're going to get discouraged in this market. Buyers get discouraged, that hurts the realtor. So now that you have them engaged, I would show them on different properties. I'd look at the ABM. I do a bid over ask comparison so that you can correctly evaluate if you're going to be able to get that home over asking price, if it is a good idea. Now, it might be a good idea, but it may present other problems. It might not appraise. It might change the LTV. You might need a bigger down payment. So I get it that there's other areas that you can have heartburn in, but I would walk them through that. And then we talk about the interest rate environment. And if we do think that rates are going to go up over the summer, then it might be a better idea to do that today because, well, A, prices are going to go up probably over the summer, but also so are interest rates. So it might be better to, if you can, to the extent you can, offer a little bit more today. If you're looking at refinancing and you're a little butthurt because you missed out on a rate below 3 and you're emotional about it, I would show them the evaluation tool that we have, because that evaluation tool will show them very clearly that if you were to refinance today at a little higher rate than what you were hoping for, the 2 3/4 magical rate that you wanted, and now you're heartbroken and you're upset about 3 1/8. Well, why 3 1/8 today? The savings that you would have, even if you got that 2 3/4, 6 months, 12 months from now, will evaluate how long it would take. It would surprise people. It would take them 4 or 5 years to break even. So that's when they say, oh my gosh, let me get over the emotion and let me get into application. So that's the approach that I would take. That's what I think an advisor does. An advisor doesn't say it's a good time to buy a home. An advisor shows you in your specific zip code with the certain conditions that you have, why there may be a compelling case for you to be highly engaged in this process.
That's awesome. That's amazing. Thank you, Barry. Dan, what about you?
So I like everything you said is great because it's, you know, it's just empirical data, and data speaks to people very loudly. So rather than piggyback onto that, I would also add that more of a holistic approach. We talk about macroeconomics, and buyers, consumers really resonate with this topic because it's simple. And so when they say, should I buy a home? Let's just say, I'm going to guess that a lot of them are of millennial, you know, in that age group, because that's the majority of home buyers. So I'll answer it that way and just say, how many people do you know in your age group that you went to high school, college with are thinking about buying a home? And how much longer do you think that's going to exist? Because there's a lot more of you coming. I'm the father of 3 of them. The oldest already bought a home, and the middle is looking, and the youngest is just letting me rent a house for her. That's a whole nother topic. And so I think when people understand what's coming, you know, down the pike, they realize that it is a good time to buy a home. The other thing that I would add is it's completely a personal issue. So after before the meltdown, I'm somewhat lucky, somewhat used good data. We sold our home, and we rented a home for 7 years. It was the longest time in my life that I rented. I bought my first home when I was 19 years old. And for a while, I was actually saying, you know, renting's not so bad. We were renting a home in Corona Del Mar. We were paying about $5,000 a month, which I realize sounds ridiculous to rent a home. But the average home in that neighborhood was $2.5 million. So I would have had to tie up $1 million in cash and have a $7,000 payment. So I'm like, you know, why would you buy? I didn't say that publicly, but that was in my head. And then one day, my wife and I just realized every year we're wondering what is Shauna going to do? You know, is she going to renew the lease? We like it. It's become home. My daughter goes to the high school here. I don't want to have to move. It's a terrible thing to move. And that actually started weighing on us. And so we decided to buy. We bought not far from you, Ryan, in Laguna Niguel, which was a more reasonable housing market. We sold in Corona del Mar $1,400 a square foot. Back then, Laguna Niguel was $400 a square foot. The two were 30 minutes apart, and Laguna Niguel was actually a better community. So my point was there was a great alternative to now buy, get rid of all this fear of renting. And by the way, our rent went up every single year. When we moved into that house, it was $3,900. When we moved out, it was $5,500. Who wants to live with that? So I think that's a big part of it. It's just the peace of mind of owning a home, and just watching my wife go back into that decorating mode and shopping and hiring the landscapers. And she hadn't been that happy in a long time. And you don't really think that one thing like that should create happiness, but it does. There's nothing more fundamental than the joy that owning a home can bring. And that might sound corny, but that's real coming from my own perspective. So that's what I tell people. Oh, one more thing is, I think this is relevant. I helped my oldest daughter buy a home, and this is pretty funny, actually. So the only thing she could afford was an FHA 5/1 ARM. This is a very low-cost area, way northern California. Yeah, she paid $245,000. She got 3 acres, ranch-style home, 2,700 square feet. Unbelievable. Pool, barn, she had horses. But the payment, all in, PITI, was $1,600. She was renting a home, a piece of junk in Concord, California, for about $1,500. She couldn't get her mind around the extra $150 payment. She's like, Dad, how am I going to afford this? And I said, well, I'm on the loan with you, so
please do it.
We're going to afford it. Now this was 5 years ago. That home is worth $450,000. So my 35-year-old daughter has about a $250,000 net worth thanks to the equity in her home. That $1,650 payment looks so cheap to her. She's just like, Dad, I cannot believe you said this was going to happen. You said I'll look back one day and think this payment is cheap, and it worked. The catch to the story, by the way, I'm not selling arms here, but she got a 3.5% 5/1 ARM when fixed rates were about 3.5. She got 3.25. It just rolled to 1.6 with her interest rate. So,
wow.
Yeah, that's the case where the arm actually worked out.
Yeah,
that'll be for a year, and then it'll roll again. So long-winded answer, but I think you put the two things, very hard data, and then appeal to the emotion of a human. I think you've got a home buyer.
Yeah, I love that. Guys, one of the things we talk about on our platform is the difference between the overall economy and someone's personal economy. And I think Barry touched on it well, is that every person's decision is unique, right? A loan is like a fingerprint, right? It's unique to them, and it's our requirement, it's our fiduciary responsibility to help people, remove that fear, anxiety, uncertainty that Dan's daughter had over $150, and educate them on the financial impact that homeownership can have, short and long term. And so, using tools like MBS Highway, using the market mentorship to help them kind of understand what's happening is going to be incredibly important. And then I'll leave everybody with this: show your clients how you can help them in between transactions, because that's going to be the difference between the people who are really valuable as mortgage professionals and the people who are just transactional. Customer service, rates, speed, high level communication. I did a realtor presentation the other day, and verbatim, the realtor said, those things are all normal. We hear those things all the time, but what you guys are doing to help our buyers and our sellers for the next 30 years is incredible. But that takes tools. It takes investing in your business. It takes systems. It takes infrastructure. So invest in yourself, not only with investments in tools like MBS Highway and market mentorship and art of homeownership, but in time to be able to get educated in sitting through the hour that we spent together today. Go back, rewatch this, and it will definitely help a ton. So Barry, Dan, I can't thank you guys enough. I know if all the comments here are indication of how excited everybody was to see this, I can say it was a massive success, and I know that we will all utilize this really well now through the end of the year. And if we can have you guys back on, maybe 3 months, 6 months down the line to kind of recap some of these things and keep us educated. We'd love the opportunity.
Love it.
Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
All right, guys. Everyone, thanks for watching, and we will see y'all soon.
Take care.